Right. So I believe we're recording, John. Okay. So let's go. So hello there from Sagara. I'm here today on behalf of the Recovery College, and I'm interviewing John Goode, who is a Church of England chaplain and works at the Recovery College with me, and he also works with the trust that I work in. So welcome, John.
Hi, Sagara, and welcome to everybody. It's really nice to see you all. Well, not see you all, but hopefully you'll enjoy this interview.
Great. So, like, the idea with the interviews, we're going to be doing quite a few of these. So we're hoping they're probably going to be about 10 to 15 minutes long. And I'm just going to ask John maybe 4 or 5 questions and just explore his life and his role and how he's getting on in the current kind of environment. That's okay. So maybe we could start. You could just tell us a bit about your life, John. I mean, not too much, obviously.
Yeah, because it's 53 years of it. Just to say, I'm actually a Mackem by birth. I was born at the Sunderland Royal Hospital back in 1967. And sorry, my wife's been coffee in. Oh, brilliant, thank you. And I moved down to the Midlands, where my family from when I was 2. So I grew up in the Midlands, mainly in a small town called Kidderminster, which at the time was producing carpets. My father actually was a vicar actually in the Church of England, but it kind of put me off growing up in a church family, and I really stopped being. I regard myself as not as being an atheist or agnostic from about my mid-teens really, and that continued pretty much throughout my 20s. I didn't do well at school particularly, but I eventually managed to get some. I got a scholarship to a private school, got kicked out with virtually no O levels, and went to a local comp in Stourbridge and got all my O levels and A levels, and went to Lancaster to do a degree, and it was great, mainly because the whole Manchester scene was kicking off down the road in the late 80s. So I had a good time. So so that got me into music, which I've always loved music ever since. And also politics. I used to go to the non-stop picket outside the South African embassy. I was part of the people who used to go down there. So I pretty much was a pretty standard student, really. I was sort of a certain type in that time. And then after that, I left. When I left university, I went to. I did some teacher training, and went to teach English as a foreign language in a Palestinian refugee camp. Just north of Jerusalem. I had this opportunity to do that, and it was a really interesting experience in my life because I was in the middle of the Intifada, which was an uprising of young people at the time, mainly led by young people, and I saw some pretty awful things going on in Bethlehem and in the camps. And it kind of strengthened my dislike of organised religion because I just felt that a lot of the problems were to do with religion and just culture and so on. So that I came back pretty angry from all that. I mucked about a bit after that. So I worked as a cleaner in central London, around Regent Square. No, it was Piccadilly Circus and shops around there, and was living in a squat. And it was a really interesting time. There was an awful lot there. But I got interested in a lot of my mates were becoming homeless or on various sort of things, various stuff going on. So I got interested in working with homeless people. I started working for a voluntary agency working around King's Cross called the Simon Community, which is, interesting enough, was a Christian organisation made up of volunteers doing work, and I just went along to help out really, also to get some free food. But anyway, I got interested, and doing that. And I decided I needed to sort myself out. So I applied for a social work course down in Bristol Uni, which I got on, which is brilliant. I went down there and worked. I worked, trained in Bristol, had a great time down there. It's a lovely city. And then I worked back. I did some work for an adult team for a while, but actually I really wanted to go back and work with street homeless. So I went back to London and working for a project in the East End of London, a voluntary agency, which had taken over a church, an old church soup kitchen. They were working out of a church crypt in Aldgate in East London. But I mean, it wasn't a church organisation. I came there as a social worker to develop it as a separate voluntary agency, and it was a really interesting time. This was in the early 90s when things were pretty bad, really, for homelessness in London. And I saw an awful lot. I got to know an awful lot about what was going on in relation to the causes of homelessness and what could or couldn't be done, really. And after a while, I got pretty fed up with the role I was doing, because I felt like I was just doing tick box exercise, and just seeing people as a collection of problems that needed to be solved. So if people came in and they wanted food, you gave them a food parcel. If they needed a bed for the night, you put them in a hostel, or if they wanted rehab, you put them on a rehab course. It was all about ticking boxes, and I didn't feel it was really getting to the real issue that was going on in people's lives. And so I set up a course called the Men's Group, which was suggested by one of the service users, actually. And I did this with a psychologist. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to get people talking about their lives, talking about their stories, rather than just talking about their problems, because that's what people were used to doing. And it was really interesting because people started talking after a while about what it felt like to be homeless, and they talked about what it felt like to have people pissing on you, when you were lying in the street, or having people step over you and ignore you, and all the things that people experience as homeless people. But also they also talked about the positives, about the fact that they had friends who they could trust their lives with, and they never had that experience before. So that they had people who looked out for them, and they looked out for people, and they had that really close bonds that they developed with people. So it was really interesting. It gave me a totally new perspective on what working with people was about. And it was about that time that I started getting interested again in Christianity. Partly because I was probably, as you can tell from what I've done before, I was quite strong. I still am a strong socialist, and but I felt that there was a limit to what Marxism and a lot of the kind of that left-wing ideology could do about dealing with the fundamental condition that people were in. And I started reading this philosopher called Simone Weil, who wasn't a Christian, but she was a Marxist who struggled with a lot of the issues that I was sort of dealing with. And she quoted this Spanish saying, which said, "When suffering makes people invisible," and that's a saying that stayed with me all my life, really. That's suffering doesn't. I mean, people sort of sometimes see suffering as something that actually makes people, strengthens people, or makes, is a noble thing. I don't think that. I think if people survive it, brilliant. But a lot of people don't. It's awful. It makes people invisible. It pushes people out to the margins. And I felt that I wanted to do something that was about bringing people back into the centre of life and the centre of their lives. And also that I came to understand the story of Christ in those terms, that he was somebody who was pushed out to the edge. He was somebody who was quietly taken out of the picture. By this point, I wasn't a Christian as such. I didn't believe in the resurrection, but I certainly believed in the crucifixion. It seemed to me that what happened to Jesus was completely had happened to countless people down through the centuries, and continued to happen in different ways. People were quietly taken out of the picture. People who didn't fit, people who weren't right, people who weren't seen as being normal. They were quietly pushed to the side, pushed to the edge. And I came to understand that a key part of Christianity about addressing that, being about bringing people back into the centre of life, allowing them to be fully human. And I came to understand the message of Jesus in those terms. But as I said, I wasn't a Christian. I didn't see myself as a Christian. But I felt I needed to take a bit of a break. The work wasn't really work. I didn't really enjoy the work anymore. So I split up with my then girlfriend. So I took myself off. At the time I didn't have a job. I mean, I didn't have any obligations. Didn't have a house or anything. I was just renting. So I just went off and stayed in a community off the west coast of Scotland. One minute I was in London, next minute I was in Iona, which is just off Mull, off the west coast of Scotland. And there's a community there called the Iona community, which was set up in the 30s, working with originally with people who come from the Glasgow, they're out of work. People in Glasgow were being set up, involved in setting up this community it was a Christian community, and it continued with this commitment to social action, but also to follow and understand the early Christianity, which had started in that area. A guy called St. Columba had established Christianity up in Scotland, and it was a monk from Iona, St. Aidan, who established Christianity up here in the northeast on Lindisfarne. So there's a link there, and I went up there and spent some time there, just working in the community, really, guiding people around the abbey, which is the ancient abbey there. And I became a Christian on Easter Day 1997, when I realised that when the bread was broken at the altar table in the church, and I was just watching it, and then all of a sudden I had a real sense of Christ being alive, and being alive now, not just alive back 2,000 years ago, but being alive now in the breaking. And at that moment, I had a real strong sense of the reality of Christ, and Christ being alive in my just I can't explain it really, but that's what I had a sense of. And so that's really what took me on started my journey, really, to where I am now properly, I would say. And at that point I was 30. So I went to I worked in I went to, at that point I decided I just wanted to do work as a Christian, working as a social worker, working as a community worker. So I went and worked in Edinburgh, working with drug users and kids on the Craig Miller estate, and also working with students who are being expelled down in Leith Academy. I was working with down there on a project there, working with kids who are being in danger of being expelled, and I really enjoyed that work. I would have liked to stay in Edinburgh. It was a good time, but I felt called to the priesthood. I felt called to celebrate the Eucharist, because I felt that the Eucharist, the breaking of the bread and the sharing of the wine, was about this image of bringing people back into the centre of life. That for me was the most powerful image of community, of the kingdom, of the reality of the revolution. It was a revolution. It was about bringing people back into the centre, and that for me, I felt really called to do that. So I went to Bristol. I went to Birmingham College, Birmingham Theological College, where I met my wife, which was who's also a priest, a better one than me. And then I went on to do train at. I went on to work in Leeds and in Hartlepool, where my first child was born. And then in the West End of Newcastle, I was working in Denton, all as a parish priest. But then I felt that I didn't really think I was working. I found working in the church quite hard. I didn't feel that actually I was really able to support people as much as I wanted to. That often the church communities were more concerned about being served by them rather than serving the community, the wider community. Interesting enough, at that time, what actually really affected my opinion was somebody from the Hadrian Clinic was discharged into the area I was working in. Said she wanted to come to church. I met her at the Hadrian Clinic, and when she was still on the ward, and then went and saw her in our house and supported her in coming to church. And she wasn't made welcome at all by people because of who she was. And that was kind of like the icing on the cake, really, for me. And so I thought, I need to do something different. So I took some time off to look after my second child, our second child, Edie. And by that point, we moved to North Tyneside. For my wife was doing a job for the diocese, for the church. And I started volunteering both in the prison, at Durham Prison, but also for Northumberland Tyne and Wear, as it was then, working as a volunteer. And I really enjoyed mental health. For me, it was a culmination of all that stuff I've been talking about. That for me, all the elements of the work I've been doing had a mental health issue within it. And for me, that calling to bring people from the edge to the centre, I felt that very strongly in relation to mental health. And so I felt that the job I wanted to do was to be a chaplain in a mental health trust, because that for me was the best way I could do the job that I wanted to do, and to be to do what I thought I was called to do. Yeah. Does that cover it all?
Yeah, that's great. It's great. It's very inspiring. I suppose I was thinking, like, when you were talking, I was thinking I could interview about every kind of aspect of that. And in many ways, we've got a lot in common because, you know, I've got the Buddhist background, but I also work with, say, heroin users in Reading, and I think the way you talk about suffering is kind of I relate to that, and even the symbolism of Christ. I've kind of been exploring the Christian mystics recently, and it's really interesting that you interpret it that way. So maybe in another interview we could if people were interested. But yeah, you know, that's great. And so this Zoom's going to cut out in about 10 minutes because through an error. But I wonder if we could do like a quick question, and then we'll restart it. Okay.
Right.
Could you just say like a little bit about just about what you do now? What do you do now?
Right. I mean, there's the nuts and bolts stuff. There's the going on the wards. There's the seeing people, meeting people, patients on the wards, supporting staff, and obviously, increasingly, a lot of people are being supported in the community. And so my work increasingly has involved looking at ways that I can support people in the community. So that's the nuts and bolts stuff. The idea of a chaplain is that we provide spiritual care and support, and that work that comes from a number of different backgrounds. So we have a humanist chaplain, we have a Buddhist chaplain, we have a Muslim chaplain, and I suppose what all these chaplains have in common is that they draw on their own traditions to engage with the reality of being a human being to a human being. And I know that sounds trite, but actually to treat somebody else as a human being takes a lot of discipline and a lot of, you need to know where you're coming from, because otherwise the danger is, as I talked about earlier, as a social worker, you put people in boxes, turn people into a problem, you turn people into a patient, you turn people into the other, the different, the people who are weird, the people who don't fit. And actually, for me, being a chaplain means to take all that out of the way and just to treat the person as a person and the way that they want to be treated, to give them the respect, the integrity that they deserve. And that comes from and I draw my own tradition as a Christian to do that. but I also want to help other people to draw on whatever it is that they can draw on in order to engage with people in that way. And so that fundamentally for me is what being a chaplain is about. And that can be end up doing lots of different things in the end, actually. It's not just going on awards or things like that. It's also about popping into drop in and chatting to people, just being around people, just being myself and being me and treating them as in a way that I feel that they deserve to be treated, to coin a phrase. And you can do that in lots of different ways. You can do courses, you can do training, but fundamentally you're present to people. You're providing by the sense of chaplaincy presence, the idea that actually there's people who are going to treat you in a way that actually you deserve to be treated, really. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes total sense to me, and I think it's really inspiring. And again, in my role as a chaplain in the prison, you really see that they're, because in the prisoners are really not treated like people in the prison, and all they want is, like, all people really want is to be seen and held as people, really, in a way. So it's great.
People take people. I mean, this is a great thing. This is what I got from my socialism. People take their oppression within themselves. Their oppression becomes an integral part of their psyche, and then you get labelled as schizophrenic and all the other kind of labels you get given. But fundamentally, you're oppressed. Your struggle to live your life has caused you to be ill. Because of what's been done to you. I mean, and this is true time and time again, from working with street homeless people to working in the prisons to working with out in the estates in Hartlepool and Denton. I met people, and after a while, when you got talking to people, there was things that had happened in their life that had caused them to be where they were and to be in the situation they found themselves in. And that's certainly the case with drug users, heroin users. I mean, heroin is a really interesting drug. I think people who take heroin, you might disagree with me, Sagara, but people take heroin to feel good about themselves. If you want to feel good about yourselves, heroin's the best thing you can take. And why do people want to feel good about themselves? Because they've been told that they're shit. Excuse my language. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I posted a video the other day, which I might put on the site, but it was where they went into an American prison and they formed a circle. It was one of the worst prisons in America. They formed a circle, and then they asked them to take a step forward if they'd ever been shouted at by a parent or hit by a parent, and like everybody moved towards the center of the circle, and they found it really kind of relieving just to admit that, and to see that what they are is a consequence of their childhood often, or the events that have happened to them in the past. So I totally get what you're saying. Yeah.
And I think for me, what's interesting is part of that journey towards dealing with that is not infantilizing them. It's not saying, "Oh, poor person." It's actually saying, "No, you can overcome this. You're more than this, and you can take integrity for your life. You have all the resources you need with our support to be the person that you want to be."
Yeah.
And I think that is one of the most key things I think as a chaplain I've got to give people, because I meet people who are deeply, and some of the people in the recovery college, a lot of the people in the recovery college are extraordinary. They're amazing people, and actually it's a privilege for me to meet them and be with them and tell them how fantastic they are. They don't think they are, but I do, and they're extraordinary people. They've survived so much, but also they have got so much to give. And part of my journey is about walking with them on that, and helping them in there.
Fantastic. And I think what you're describing in terms of bringing them back into the center is like that thing where we, as a society, we seem to lock in those problems with shame. So we say, like, "Oh, you're over there, you should be ashamed of what you are." But like when we bring them back in, it can be really freeing for people.
It's the sadness about, in mental health, the sadness is about the asylum system, the original vision of asylum, which was set up by Christians. The idea of the asylum was it was a Christian concept, that you took people from difficult circumstances and gave them this place which allowed them to get better. That was the original idea. What's now Hopewood Park, used to be Cherry Knoll, was set in a beautiful countryside. It was a beautiful building. And the idea was to give them this place that allowed them to find themselves again. They were taken out, they could come out of the slums of Sunderland and to live in this community for a while.
Okay, so you ready? We're back.
Yeah, I can listen.
So you were talking about the asylum. You were talking about Hopewood Park.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there's a real underlying the whole way in which we work with people. There is a vision about mental health, which I think we need to go back to, which I think is there in the original idea of the asylums, which was that these were places where people could have a break from their lives, to literally seek asylum, to actually have space to recover and to find themselves. And I think with the development of there's a story of what happened to the asylum system in the late 19th century, which needs to be told, I think, and in the early 20th century, namely the advent of medicalization of mental health. Schizophrenia was identified in I think at the turn of the century, but also the other problem was the problem with sexual related diseases. What's it called? Basically, there was an epidemic of sex-related disease, which affected people's mental health, and there was a massive rise in people in the asylum system, and it got overwhelmed. But I think the original vision with underlying mental health in this country, I think is a very powerful one. I think there's a lot to be said for looking at ways in which we can create space for people to be themselves. I mean, we don't have these large institutions don't work, and we discovered that. Yeah. So now we need to look at finding ways we can actually create spaces in our communities to allow us to recover, to find ourselves, to seek asylum, really, to look at ways of being who we are. And for me, the Recovery College is a key part of how we go about doing that. Creating spaces that it's not about having one place that everyone comes to, but we look to seek to create spaces in the community that actually allow us to learn about who we are, to find out new ideas about that help us, and to really get on with the business of being ourselves. And that for me is key to what I think mental health should be about.
Yeah, fantastic. And and I guess that's what we're trying to do now. And we've got this kind of weird circumstances at the moment, and we're actually going online now, so that space has been online. And that was really the other thing that I wanted to ask you about, because I know you've got a couple of ideas. I've been doing the meditations at 2 p.m. Do you want to say something about?
Yeah, well, first I want to say what a fantastic job you've been doing, Sagara. And actually, it's a real, it's something really to be able to get on board with you on this, and to look at working alongside you is a real privilege, because I think already there's a sense in which people are engaging with what you're doing. And those of you who haven't been to Sagara's meditation, please come along. It's really, really good. Is it twice a week you're doing it now?
And it's every day this week, and then it'll be twice next week. But
I mean, this is all about creating space in your own room. You can create this space. You don't need to go out to create the space. Sagara's helping you create that space in your own place to actually recover and to be yourself. And so so being able to support Sagara in that's really important for me. I think I'm going to be doing something different. It's interesting. I want to have a conversation with you, Sagar, about what, because you had some perspectives on this, which sounded very interesting. But what I want to do is look at ways in which we can build up a network of care and support. And I believe you do that through prayer. Well, that's one of the ways we can do that. So what I'm looking to do is set up a prayer tree, actually, which sounds a bit sort of hippie. But the idea is that people can bring their own issues. They can bring their own thing online, and we pray about it together. We need to look at how we can actually do this in reasonable confidentiality, and I think you need to ask people to bring their own issues, not other people's, if that makes sense. But I think the idea is that we pray, bring our own together. We pray and we support each other, and I think that complements what you're doing, Sagara, quite well, because there's a sense in which we build up that sense of building up a network of care and support, which is out there, and that we're not alone. Because I think that's what people have been feeling. That isolation is a terrible thing for people's mental health, and we need to look at ways we can feel connected. And I believe prayer is part of how we do that. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. And so you're going to do that next Wednesday at 2 p.m. I mean, the question I have. Sorry, you're going to do that initially next Wednesday at 2 p.m. But is that something that everybody could come to, or is it like a Christian thing, or like?
No, everybody in the. I mean, obviously, I will be part of. I think what I'm going to be doing is, I think we need to look at the format a bit. I haven't really given much thought about it, but the idea is it's working a bit like a prayer board, in a church or in the chaplaincy offices we have. And actually, we call it a prayer board, but it's just stuff with people bringing their stuff and they're putting it out there. And so actually, what's important is that people can put what's going on for them on our website, and we can read each other's thing and provide support. But I will be there on Wednesday at 2:00, reading them out, and I'll bring it all together in a prayer and a short reflection. So I'll be saying something, perhaps reading something, or something that might help people, which won't be necessarily Christian. It could be anything. I might be reading bits of the Bible, but I'll also be reading stuff which I think has helped me. And I'll be doing that, but also I'll be reading out and praying for all those who have asked me to pray for them, and I'll be doing that as part of that session. It'll be quite short, but so if you want to feel that, that sense in which you're being held, people can come on, and I will be sort of, put something on Facebook in the comments section. Well, I think we'll be looking at setting up some kind of sort of tree thing, won't we, Sigal? Is that right?
Yeah.
Which allows people to put stuff on. And we'll be very clear about what we'll be asking people. Because there's issues about confidentiality and stuff, so we need to kind of make sure that's okay. But what main thing is that I'll be there praying for you and holding you in prayer, because that and actually recognizing a reality, which I believe is there, that we all of us are deeply connected at a deep level. And part of what I do is making that manifest from my own tradition, but it doesn't matter where people are coming from,
Right.
Yeah.
So we'll put a post on the Facebook page about how people can engage with that. We'll do that.
Yeah. I mean, there's a saying. There's a British poet called John Dryden, who was also a dean of St Paul's Cathedral. He started off writing love poetry, which some of them are really sort of interesting. Well worth having a look at. Actually, they're really good. But he somewhere along the line he found God. I probably became a bit more boring, unfortunately, but he had a wonderful phrase. Yeah, he wrote beautiful poetry, and he had a wonderful phrase for turn of words. And of course, it was him who said that no man is an island, and I think that's a really important thing to remember at this time. Yeah. By man, of course, he meant women as well, but you know what I mean. And so I think that's that things like that sense of those things that, you know, we can find stuff that points towards a reality which we all want to share in, and we all come from a variety of different backgrounds to do that.
Fantastic. Great. Okay, and then maybe we could just briefly mention your other idea as well, because it's not quite formed yet, is it? But
which idea was that? Go.
music.
Was that? Oh yes. One of the things that those of you who come to the Thursday morning drop-in at with the Recovery College, and hopefully we'll be starting it back up again. And hello to all of you who are involved in that. I'm missing you all. I think it's at the New Springs Church on Thursday morning, 11 o'clock. So when we start back up again, please come along. One of the things I do there, those of you who have been going know that I put together a I have my Spotify account. We set up a playlist. One of the things I ask people when they first come through the door, because I recognise it's really, really difficult for people when they first come through the door into these places. It's a real step. It takes a lot of courage for people to do that, take that first step through the door into these into this new environment, not knowing what they find. And hopefully we can make that first step as supporters, support you as much as possible in that. And one of the things I do is I ask people what their favourite track is, and I add their track to the playlist we have. And I'd quite like to do something like that online. So having something about where we ask people want to put on their favourite track and say something about why they like it so much, and whether they've got a particular memory, or you know, is it attached to a particular event, or you know, it could be a whole host of stuff. And it'd be quite nice to have something where people can share their musical memories as well as their sort of
We'll set that up as well. That should be quite easy to do. So
because music's something. I think music is really powerful. It connects people together. You know.
For sure. Yeah. Okay, wonderful. So thank you so much.
Hey, Scar, it's always good to chat to you, mate. and thank you to you and Chris for getting this up and going. I mean, it's brilliant, and I'm really glad to be involved.
It's our pleasure. I'm sure I speak for Chris as well. Yeah. So and it's great to have you on board. So okay, so we'll do another one of these on like religion or something. I don't know, but for the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose so. I mean, I'm not really. I mean, you probably could gather, I'm not a massive professional. There's a lad, actually, Raza, who's a Muslim chaplain. It's worth interviewing him. He's a canny lad, and he works.
I'm kind of a bit like you with religion as well, even though I'm technically a Buddhist. It's like that would be quite interesting. But anyway, we'll see. But thank you for today, and
hey, pleasure. Good to see you, Cigar. All right. Cheers. Bye.
Bye.
Should we